Recently a topic came up on one of my videos. Well, actually not really a topic, but more of an argument in comments in one of my videos. So I did a review of a fragrance and the brand calls it a gourmand. And there was a comment and all of a sudden it started like a bunch of different comments back to back saying that this is not a gourmand, it's an Oriental fragrance. And I'm like, what are gourmands? They're part of Oriental fragrances. So I thought, you know what, since some people need some educating and also understanding of what the differences are, I thought I'd put together a video and speak to you about Oriental fragrances versus gourmand fragrances, my favorite genres, and also give you 12 different varying degrees of Oriental gourmand fragrances. So if you want to find out what these are and what the differences are between Oriental and gourmand fragrances, then please stay tuned. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is Sebastian with Smelling Great Fragrance Reviews. Yes, today I'm talking about Oriental fragrances, but more about gourmand fragrances, because in the end, gourmand fragrances are very, very delicious fragrances. But you know what? Oriental fragrances can be delicious as well. And what are the differences between the two? Well, you know, I should also mention there is a video on the channel called What Are Oriental Fragrances? You can go catch that. But today I'm going to focus on Oriental fragrances, but I'm going to go in more of a gourmand direction to understand the differences between gourmands and Oriental fragrances, which basically are similar to me because they start out, gourmand fragrances start out, Oriental fragrances in general, that's how they start out, but then they get additional notes added that are more foodie and things like that. So that's what I'm discussing today, and if this is something you're curious, stick around because I'm also going to offer 12 different gourmand fragrances. And again, they're in varying degrees of gourmandness, but I would call them gourmands because they smell delicious to me. So anyway, those are what we're discussing today on the channel. But before I get to this topic, if this is your first time tuning into the channel and you still haven't subscribed, please do click the subscribe button below and also click the bell so that you'll be notified for future videos and giveaways. And yes, these are my favorite styles of fragrances. I love warm, sweet, spicy, resinous, amber fragrances. My favorite fragrances, and they're perfect fragrances to wear in the winter time because they end up being the more heavier, the denser, the thicker, longer lasting fragrances, and they're perfect to wear in the winter time. So what are the differences? So Oriental fragrances definitely feature notes like vanilla, benzoin, musk, other resins besides benzoin, woods, and spices. So those are basically what Oriental fragrances are. Anytime you see those notes, it's going to go into the Oriental direction. And I love these notes, as I said, in fragrances. So what's the difference between an Oriental fragrance and also a gourmand fragrance? Gourmand fragrances typically have those notes. Vanilla is one. And you know, anytime I see a heavy overdose of vanilla, I immediately call it a gourmand. I think it's a gourmand because it smells like vanilla. It's a food item that is used in cooking. So anytime you see an overdose of vanilla, that's a gourmand to me. But in general, if you add notes such as chocolate, caramel, coffee, bananas, it's a fruit, pralines, cookies, milk, whipped cream, fruits, and much more, you're basically going to get a gourmand fragrance. And again, gourmand fragrances to me are delicious. Anytime I say a fragrance is delicious, I'm almost bordering gourmand fragrances. But you know what? I think if we go back in time to one of the very first gourmand fragrances, which is this right here, Mugler's Angel, is considered a gourmand and one of the very first gourmand fragrances. To me, this is the least gourmand fragrance. Yes, it's an Oriental fragrance, that's the style, but it's called a gourmand. But as I said, if you compare it to something like, let me see, what do I have here? This one, Secret Sucre from MOLINARD. We're going to talk about that later. Or even this one, Angel Share from KILIAN. If you compare it to fragrances like that, then this is the least gourmand fragrance. Even though it's called a gourmand, I think it doesn't really act like a true gourmand, but I still call it a gourmand, you know? So this is the technicality, and you know, it's also subjective. this is a gourmand for me. Some people might not call it a gourmand. Still, it falls under the Oriental fragrance category. Same with this one. Let me tell you this. This one right here, Mugler's Amen, is considered a gourmand, but this isn't like a real true gourmand if you compare it to those two fragrances I just showed you. This acts less of a gourmand than the other two, but still it's called a gourmand, and in the end it's an Oriental woody fragrance. It's a gourmand. One other thing I should bring up, there was other question that came up within this list of questions, and this person brought up Aventus. They said, oh, well, Aventus has pineapple in it. It's not really a gourmand, or it's not considered a gourmand. Well, no, I would never call this a gourmand. It's actually a very, very modern, cheaper fragrance. And when you look at the notes, or when you smell it, do you smell vanilla? For me, I think anytime I see base notes full of vanilla, resins, benzoin, musk, things like that, as soon as you see warm notes, then you would call it an Oriental. Then you have to see what kind of additional notes they have. If they have vanilla or throw in something like almonds, yes, it's going to go into the Oriental gourmand direction. It's very subjective too. Like if you're going to call this fragrance an Oriental, most likely sometimes it's going to go a gourmand. And gourmand fragrances, as I said, typically have notes of, cookies, chocolate, milk, pralines, all of that stuff. Lots of different stuff. One more example I should say, a lot of amber fragrances rely on spices with resins. I don't call those true gourmands. Even though you might say that they smell delicious, they're not using, the chocolate, the vanilla, the almonds, the woods, the pralines, the cookies, milk, things like that. So those don't go into a gourmand direction to me, but in the end, they still smell delicious. But for me, those are not true gourmand fragrances. For me, true gourmands are as soon as you see foodie notes with vanilla or resins and some spices, then I think those go into gourmand fragrances. For me, they do. And this particular fragrance, the brand called it a gourmand. They called it a gourmand. Yes, it's an Oriental, but it's a gourmand. If they call it a gourmand, if you don't think it's a gourmand, then don't think it's a gourmand. But you can't say it's not a gourmand because you think it's not a gourmand. Does that make sense? Anyway, that's just a little bit of a explanation of what the differences are between Oriental fragrances and gourmands. Again, they are one and similar to me. Gourmands fall under Oriental fragrances. Oriental fragrances came first, then gourmands came, and as I said, the very first gourmand, or at least one of the very first gourmands to me, is Angel. And again, those Angel and Amen are the least gourmand fragrances to me. Alright, moving on to the fragrances, and we're going to start off with one fragrance that's mostly known for vanilla. It's Guerlain's Spiritueuse Double Vanille, this one right here. So this one, is it a true gourmand? For me, it's not a little minuscule amount of vanilla to kind of like, form the base of the fragrance. The vanilla takes center stage, and for me it's a boozy vanilla, and in the end it's going to be a gourmand. It's a very, very delicious vanilla fragrance featuring vanilla with benzoin, and benzoin is this resin, and as I said, Oriental fragrances typically have vanilla with resins like benzoin, and then it has, adds additional notes of musk and things like that in the base, and woods, and just basically relies on benzoin and vanilla. That's what creates our really, really delicious vanillic experience, the boozy vanillic experience. But in addition to the vanilla and benzoin, there's cedar, ylang ylang, incense, rose, pink pepper. A great scent from Guerlain, great scent from this collection. It's a really, really delicious and gourmandy vanilla fragrance. So that's Spiritueuse Double Vanille. Going to a fragrance that is an odd gourmand to me, but it smells like a true gourmand. But even though it's called an Oriental woody fragrance, I feel like this, I think it's, For me, they're using notes to create accords to smell gourmand, and it's basically ROJA Parfums Sweetie Oud. It's a very, very gourmand fragrance. It smells like a bakery, a patisserie, croissants, smoky, kind of steamy croissants, you know, it's very, very delicious. But when you look at the notes, there's no mention of gourmand notes whatsoever, but still it's called a gourmand. I think they're relying on the smell. But when you look at the notes, as I said, cardamom, oud, oak, patchouli, olibanum, rose, labdanum. Labdanum is what makes the amber accord. Gaiac wood, artemisia, juniper, cumin, cedar, bergamot, lots of different notes. But in the end, even though they're not using the gourmand notes, it smells like a gourmand fragrance. It smells like a you know, an Oriental fragrance, so we're gonna go with that. And it's a really, really delicious fragrance that smells like baked croissants, steaming, hot, smoking croissants. It's a very, very delicious fragrance, and it's not your traditional gourmand. It's an Oriental, and it's a gourmand. All right, next up, this is one of my favorites. It's a gourmand. It's an Oriental fragrance, but you know, when you look at the notes, it goes into the gourmand direction. FEVE DELICIEUSE from DIOR, from their Maison Christian Dior collection. It's loads of tonka beans, so you can totally pick up the tonka bean smell. But there's vanilla, there's cacao, there's caramel, there's cherry, there's praline. Gourmand. It's an ultra gourmand, a true gourmand, right? With lavender, benzoin, milk, mint, leather, sandalwood, lots of different notes, very, very delicious, very, very cozy, very, very comfy, and in the end, it's a gourmand, but it's an Oriental and it's gourmand. Makes sense? FEVE DELICIEUSE, great fragrance from Dior. And going to this one, Angel Share from KILIAN. It's an Oriental fragrance, but it's also a gourmand. I mean, it has boozy touches because it has cognac, and when you see boozy notes, for me, when they're kind of like meshed with vanillic notes or, you know, other similar notes, it's a gourmand for me. As soon as I think of delicious, because it smells like something I would eat, I immediately call it a gourmand. That's just me. I mean, you might not have those rules or thoughts or ideas about fragrances, but once I think of a fragrance as being delicious, it's a gourmand. And you know, some are not called gourmands, like true gourmands like this. It's an Oriental, but you know, it smells delicious and it acts like a gourmand, you know, something that I'm tasting in my mouth. But Angel's Share is a boozy fragrance relying on tonka beans, pralines, cognac, vanilla, sandalwood, oak. Really, really, really wonderfully delicious. It does smell like something like Wajan or something, similar to that fragrance. I did a video about this. You should check it out and see what I compared to. I compared to a few other fragrances, but you know, in the end, it's a gourmand. It's a delicious fragrance with boozy touches, vanillic touches, and you know, nutty touches with the tonka beans. Anyway, that's Angel Share by KILIAN. Once again, gourmand fragrances are in varying degrees, you know. Some might have more gourmand touches than others, and this one is your ultimate gourmand brand. They're known for releasing nothing but gourmand fragrances, and their fragrances are all 100 ml. Not all of them. A majority of them are under $100 for 100 ml. I'm talking about the house of COMPTOIR Sud Pacifique, and this is Vanille Banane. So this one relies on loads of vanilla with loads of banana. This is definitely a gourmand fragrance to me. Besides that, there's some rum, there's whipped cream, there's banana leaf, orange, and clover. If you like the idea of vanilla with bananas, almost like a sundae, an ice cream sundae. What do you call those? Banana, whatever it is. But you know, lots of vanillic touches. I mean, I think what you get more here is the vanilla, and then you kind of go down the list of lesser notes, but lots of bananas, lots of vanillas together with whipped cream, rum. Very, very gourmandy. They have loads of gourmands focusing on, you know, chocolates and coffee and things like that. But this I wanted to point out because in the end, it's lots of bananas with vanilla, and it's definitely a true gourmand here. Now, this one to me might not be a true gourmand, but it acts very gourmandy to me. Here we go with the note of pineapple. When you see the notes of vanilla and resinous touches in the base, then I would go with calling this a gourmand, but this one doesn't have those kind of notes. It does have pineapple, but it kind of stops there with the edible notes, so it doesn't go there. But here with LAMAR from the house of KAJAL, it's a fruity gourmand to me. It's an oriental floral fragrance, but in the end it's lots of vanilla with lots of pineapple, and there's also some red berries, there's some spices of cardamom, there's apple. So in the end it's a fruity gourmand. It's really, really delicious meshing of vanillic, sweet, warm notes, and you know, sort of sweet pineapple as well. The pineapple in here seems like it's very, very fragrant and flavorful. You know, it's like a very ripe, smelly pineapple, which is really, really beautiful. It's a great scent. Definitely gourmand, a fruity gourmand to me. It's LAMAR from the house of KAJAL. All right, this is a beautiful, beautiful gourmand. It's an oriental. All of these fragrances fall under the oriental category and they smell delicious, and for me these are definitely gourmand fragrances. This is Rouge SARAY from Atelier des Ors. Recently I featured this in a Christmas video. It's a Christmassy smell. It smells very, very delicious, but for me it's a dried fruitiness with vanilla, lots of vanilla and spices of cinnamon. So lots of vanilla, dates, plums. Even the plums smell like they're dried. But the dates are more prominent than the plums in here. The cinnamon is really, really spiky in there. It's like a spice, hits your nose, you know. Patchouli, Peru balsam, some Gaiac wood, and of course, Peru balsam is a balsam and it has Swedish touches, so it works really wonderful in here. So if you're working with oriental fragrances, Peru balsam can, you know, be featured in the base notes. Just to kind of like accentuate that vanilla note in the base notes. And here it adds this beautiful balsamic touch to the fragrance, which for me is an oriental after all, but a beautiful gourmand fragrance that's fruity and also spicy. So that's Rouge SARAY from the house of Atelier des Ors. And this one I recently spoke about on a video as well. I did a video about it. This is a whiff of a waffle cone from the house of Imaginary Authors. It's definitely an oriental fragrance, lots of vanilla, but it's a gourmand to me. It smells like an ice cream, the cone and the ice cream itself. Vanilla, heavy cream, salted caramel, amorous, orgeat, Saigon cinnamon. Those are the notes that are credited. For me, it does get creamy. It does get like heavy, like a thick cream, almost to the point of like whipped cream. But it has almondy touches from the orgeat note, and of course caramelly touches. Salted, not so much for me. But just a slightly smoked caramel, you know. It has the DNA of Imaginary Authors, but in the end it's a very, very ice cream-like quality experience. So that's a whiff of a waffle cone from the house of Imaginary Authors. So this one is a fragrance called Secret Sucre from the house of MOLINARD. This is in their higher priced collection of fragrances, and this is an absolute delicious gourmand fragrance. But you know, in the end, once again, it's an oriental because oriental and gourmand are one another. Gourmand falls under the oriental category of fragrances, and this one is the ultimate gourmand fragrance with lots of nougat note, caramel, vanilla, walnut, benzoin, tonka beans, amber. So this one to me smells like an orangey simple syrup, you know. Or my mom used to make simple syrup all the time, boiling sugar with water, and then it becomes a syrup, you know. And she would add orange blossom water in there, and this kind of smells like it. More of the orange than the blossom, like the fruit itself. But it's a gourmand. It's a really, really delicious gourmand. Very, very sugary, slightly spicy, and resinous, but wonderful, wonderful fragrance. Check it out. It's Secret Sucre from the house of MOLINARD if you don't know that brand. So here's Starlight from Xerjoff, and this is, again, it's utilizing spices with almonds and some vanillic touches, and there's amber in here. And amber, you know, typically ambers are oriental fragrances, but once they throw in some spicy notes and almonds and things like that, for me it goes into the gourmand direction. It's kind of a nutty, spicy, beautiful kind of, you know, it reminds me of baklava. It's a little bit like baklava, if you like that idea, because it has the nuts in here, the almonds, and you know, nuts are utilized in you know, desserts like baklava with the pastry, the phyllo dough pastry, and that's what kind of it reminds me of. So that's delicious, a gourmand after all, but definitely an oriental spicy fragrance from the house of Xerjoff. Okay, this next one is from the house of the different company. It is Oud for Love. And you know, gourmand fragrances can be woody. This is an overdose of gourmand notes, but lots of woody notes, including oud here. It's got also booziness from whiskey, so it's oud, caramel, whiskey, amber, cloves, castoreum, and it's an oriental woody fragrance, but very, very gourmandy to me. The caramel and whiskey together just goes into that very gourmand direction, and then throw in some spiciness from cloves. It's very, very warm and spicy to me. Definitely an oriental woody, and definitely a gourmand fragrance. You know, you've got to try some of these fragrances and see how much gourmand they go. For me, on me, they go very sweet and spicy and delicious, you know, and obviously those are the kind of fragrances I would call gourmands. But sometimes body chemistry comes into play as well. That particular fragrance, because it has so much oud in it, might not. I mean, you might bring out the oud from your chemistry more than the gourmand notes, so I would recommend you testing it out. And speaking of oud, this last fragrance includes oud as well, and then also it features some leather, so it's a gourmand fragrance, but it goes into a woody, leathery direction. This is YSL's Sleek Suede, but very, very delicious. This one relies on cocoa beans, suede leather, black oud, tanned leather. So there has lots of different leathery types of notes, but you know what? In the end, it's like a syrupy chocolate and a dusting of cacao as well. That's the experience I get with it. And because it has that suede leather, it's a buttery leather. So there are some dry and also smooth and buttery touches in here. But it's a very, very delicious chocolatey cacao fragrance. I think it's a great fragrance release from this house. And this is a house I don't really speak too much about, but that's definitely great. It's an oriental woody fragrance in the end. I would call this a gourmand, because when I smell it, it smells delicious, you know? It's very, very gourmandy. It's got lots of gourmand notes thrown in there with that cacao stuff, the cacao note in there. Anyway, Sleek Suede from YSL's Le Vestiaire collection. And that's my explanation of gourmand fragrances versus oriental fragrances. In the end, gourmand fragrances came after oriental fragrances category was created. I don't even know when, but GUERLAIN is known for the oriental fragrances with Shalimar and things like that. And of course, Angel came out in 1992. So for me, that is one of the very first gourmand fragrances. But to me, even though it's known as a gourmand, it doesn't really smell like a gourmand. So this particular topic, question and argument that was raised on a video of mine, you know, resulted in me doing this this particular video, because in the end, this is known as a gourmand, but to me it doesn't really smell like a true gourmand. And then the argument of this brand calling their fragrance a gourmand and this person saying it's not a gourmand, it's an oriental. Very subjective, right? So all of it is very subjective, but to me, when you take a fragrance like this that doesn't really act like a true gourmand, is known as a gourmand, then really, can you really have that argument? Anyway guys, let me know your thoughts on this particular topic. What do you consider an oriental fragrance? What do you consider a gourmand fragrance? How much gourmandy, foodie notes do you have to have in a fragrance for it to go into the gourmand direction? And how much do you don't have to make it just an oriental fragrance? Does that question make sense to you? Let me know, put some comments down, and let me know what your favorite oriental fragrances are, and also your favorite gourmand fragrances are, so I can find out. Anyway, thanks so much for watching today's video. If you have any questions or comments, please list below. Please do like this video, please share it, follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I'll be back with more videos very soon. Have a good one, guys. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.